Okay, I'm here with William Durning, candidate for the Regional Council, Waikato Regional Council.
It is the Waikato
Regional Council.
Yep.
Make sure I got it right.
G'day, how are you?
And everyone, he seems to be well recognised, it seems. But yeah, so thanks for coming
Thank you
and
very
sitting
much.
with me for this. Now, the important thing is, why should we, or more importantly, why should I vote for you as a candidate in the Waikato Regional Council?
Okay, well, I've lived in Hamilton for 22 years. My wife and I have brought up our family here. I'm a dad, I'm a husband, I'm a business owner. I've been in business all that time. I've sat on a number of boards of not-for-profits as well as private businesses to help grow the economy. I've recently finished a piece of work where I was fortunate enough to be the Chief Executive of the Waikato Chamber of Commerce and helping repurpose and reform, reset and restart that. And I really care deeply not only about the city but about this region. I'm originally from Durning, which is at the southern end of the Waikato region. And I care so much about this place.
So you stayed inside the area?
I have, but I've been outside of it for a bit. I've spent a bit of time in Argentina and I've spent a bit of time in Auckland. But this is my home, and I know it sounds a bit cliche, but I really want to give back. I love being with people. I love working with people. I think I've got some skills in around being a good collaborator and helping find commonality. So, yeah.
Obviously, people like him.
About bringing people together and finding consensus so that we can move forward together.
Yeah.
And if I'm fortunate enough to be voted as a councillor by the good people of Hamilton, I can promise them I will be prepared to engage with them in ways that they want, not necessarily the way that is formally structured to engage with the council. So if it's literally sitting down and having a chat like we are right now, I'm more than happy to do that.
That's an interesting point to bring up, actually, is because we are going through a change. Both Hamilton's doubled in size since I shifted here in '87.
Yeah.
Right. So there's the physical change.
Yeah.
But in that time, we've gone through a massive technological change.
Yeah.
I never would have thought I would have been sitting here doing this when I shifted here in '87.
No.
Especially with the gear I've got.
Yep.
And as you said, tiny little gear. You can fit my camera that this is recorded on in your pocket.
It really is impressive. I mean, it's very cool.
But I think the way we interact, or the way, if you were on council, you as councillors interact with the public and get feedback, and that has gone through a number of changes and is still in the change phase, because Hamilton and the Waikato area is in a situation where it's now needing to look at where it's going for the future, and voters need to think about what do we want our area to look like in 30, 40, 50, 100 years, because we can start that shaping now, because we are now building the foundations for that area in 100 years. That's the foundations. Because we're now at a sort of a crux in the changes, and also with the technology, we've got to accept that we do communicate differently now.
Oh, absolutely.
It's not just that we're forced to, it's the fact that we have the capabilities. You go back to '87, we would have got information about councils by only going to meetings and reading stuff in a newspaper. Right?
Yep.
Now we've got social media.
Yep.
There's if a councillor or candidate publishes their details, you can email them, ask them questions.
Yep.
It's not just not a case of picking up the landline that's strapped to a wall and making a phone call.
No.
You can sit there, text, bang. Okay, what's your solution for this?
Yep.
And I think both Hamilton City Council and Waikato Regional Council and all councils in New Zealand, including the government, need to take a different look at how they're going to make use of the technology to involve the citizens a lot more.
Absolutely.
And like you're saying, sitting down and interacting with people rather than just the formal stand up and make a submission thing, because we are a pool of 160, 170,000 people
like
just in Hamilton itself.
That's right.
Of that, we all can have bright ideas. You said there's 14 people on the regional council.
That's right.
if you compare the ideas of 170,000 people to the ideas of 14 people, statistically, there's going to be more bright ideas come from the general public than just that 14.
Oh, absolutely.
So we need to be able to interact to say, oh, have you thought of doing this? Or why don't you do this way or something else? And then the councillors can actually discuss it, look at it, see if it's feasible, whatever. Use your, some of you may have skills that enable you to look at it and broaden that idea.
Yep.
For instance, you've got business background, so you can take an idea and go, oh, okay, but my business background says that if we do it in this way, just slightly different than this citizen suggested, but if we do it this way, it's going to be even better.
Yep. And I think if we think about that, ultimately councillors are there to serve the community. Now, we're appointed by the community to serve them. And in that way that we serve is that we're all the time, we are tasked with making, in some cases, quite complex and difficult decisions. And that's the job that we're there to do.
Yeah.
But it's important also that we make ourselves accessible to the people of the whole community, not just the ones that elect you in, to interact with them in ways so that they understand the work that's being done. So that raising the profile, because one of the interesting things that I've run into as I've been campaigning is that not many people know who the regional council is. And that's, to me, is a shame, because if we think about, if I use a rugby analogy, and most Kiwis sort of have a reasonable grasp of the basics of rugby, one of the most important parts in rugby is about securing the ball and then projecting power. So, for the front row of the scrum, to capture it, pass it back cleanly to the backs, and then, of course, the show ponies, who are the backs that do all the superstar stuff, they score the tries, and we win games. And that front row is two props and the hooker.
Yeah.
And so if you then use that analogy to New Zealand, the two props for New Zealand Inc. are the provinces of Auckland and the Bay of Plenty. And right there in the middle, in that critical role of hooking the ball and projecting power, is our region. And one of the reasons I say that is that if, from where you and I now are, if we took a compass and we worked out a distance of a 2-hour drive with a car or a bus, whatever it happens to be, and we worked that out on a compass, and we put that compass down literally where we are right now, and we drew a big circle and said, what's inside that circle? Over half of New Zealand's population would be inside that circle. We would have New Zealand's two major ports, the Port of Auckland, the Port of Tauranga. You would have New Zealand's most important airport, Auckland Airport. You would have New Zealand's most valuable freshwater asset, Lake Taupo, the Waikato River, power generation, financial sector, a massive range of different ethnically diverse community groups. You have multiples of iwi tribes that are sitting there. The rest of the country is really important, but we have a concentration here of New Zealanders that have the ability to really influence and secure good ball so that the rest of the country can score tries and we can all do better. And the people of Hamilton have got some big opportunities to make some good decisions about who they have working with them to make that a reality.
Okay. Now, we did a video before this on what is the regional council.
Yes.
And you mentioned the public transport system.
Yes.
And I heard you mention in there that you think it could be better.
Yes, I do.
Now, as a person who doesn't drive and rides an electric bike everywhere, and then when it's weather time, I use the buses.
Yep.
Bloody typical. Sit here and a car alarm goes off. What I'm curious about is, what do you think could be done to our bus system to make it even better?
Right.
There are a few things I can come up with, but just what do you think could be done to make it even better than what it currently is?
So what I would say is that one of the things that people should reflect on when it comes to the work that the Regional Council does is that most people would remember it under its old name of Environment Waikato. Yeah. And so an environment...
I still keep referring to that every now and again.
Most people do. It's one of those things that kind of go, oh yeah, I know who they are now. The environment is a critical part of it, as are communities and as economy. So it's economy, communities and environment. Those are, if you like, the three strategic pillars that drive the work of the Regional Council. So in the role of public transportation, one of the reasons why it's important to expand and improve the frequency, reliability and affordability of public transportation is that from an environmental point of view, that means that we've got less pollutants and less and better, I suppose, carbon outcomes and environmental outcomes by moving people efficiently rather than everybody being in a singular car. From a community point of view, we know that, for example, within the city of Hamilton, I was listening to young Tim Young, who's a candidate running for the city council, and he was saying that 20 to 25% of Hamilton's citizens are from the disability sector. Now, for them, the ability to drive a car themselves may not be viable.
Yeah.
They still need to get around. I know that there's a large number of older people that use the buses on a regular basis because not only do they not have to worry about managing a car, but they actually get to sit and talk with other people who are also on the bus. We know that young people getting to and from school, a big part of their socialising and building their relationships comes from that time again. So community benefits from good public transportation. Economy-wise, we know that the more that we can move people around efficiently using our current infrastructure, that frees up space so that for those people that do need to use cars or trucks to move goods and services and people around, they're doing that more efficiently. So there's lots of really good outcomes that we can have by just doing simple things like focusing on public transportation. What could we do? I think a big part of it is around giving people greater confidence that the frequency on key routes is going to be there. So that if you and I turn up and we say, okay, I've missed the bus that was due to leave at a certain point, but it's not a problem because in 10 minutes there's going to be another one coming along.
Sort of like the train system in Hong Kong, where you miss it. You just by the time you've realised that you've missed it, another train comes along.
Now we may have to trade off on the size of the network in order to get greater access. So it might be that we have smaller routes but much more frequent, as opposed to a larger number of routes, less frequent. And that's a trade-off that we need to do a bit of work on and make sure that we understand what's important. But nonetheless, it's all about, for those that can and do want to move to public transportation, that we make that more affordable. I think the other big thing is the regional council is very much there as an enabler. And so with regards to public transportation, it's working in partnership with either the City of Hamilton or Waikato District Council. It might be Waikato District Council, even Waikato, and saying, what do those communities need? So I know that there's certainly a lot of commentary at the moment. Mayor Andrew King is quite openly expressed the view that he would like to see free public transportation. Now, that's only going to happen in partnership and with the support of the regional council. And so making sure that if those are the sorts of initiatives that the Mayor of the city is going to want to enact, how do we do it? How do we make sure that it's funded appropriately and it works for the citizens?
And the other thing that we have to acknowledge is the fact that the edges of cities are getting closer together. We are creeping closer to Ngaruahi. Ngaruahi's boundary, or in particular ours is the one that's moving, is getting closer. So therefore, where you might get people that are quite happy who work in Auckland to come and live in Hamilton and commute, we've got people who are living on the outer edges of Hamilton, living in Ngaruahi, Cambridge, and out of that, statistically, there's going to be a certain number that would prefer to use public transport to travel that sort of distance because they can make use of the time on the bus.
Oh, absolutely.
Rather than sitting holding onto a steering wheel.
And look, I know that Councillor Paula Southgate has talked a lot about the importance, and as has Councillor Angela O'Leary, who's also running for the mayoralty, they've talked about the real importance of the regional train network in connecting to Auckland. And this is not about, and certainly Councillor Dave McPherson has got to be one of the biggest advocates. In fact, I saw him last night holding up trains and being really excited about this.
I'm surprised he hasn't been drunk for about the last month since they announced the coming trains linked to Auckland. Because I'm pretty sure every single election that I've recorded interviews for and stuff, ever since I started doing this, there has been a discussion of a rail link to Auckland.
I think it's really great.
And he's been on the front line of that.
And we've got lots of incredibly hardworking councillors in the city who equally need hardworking and partner councillors at a regional level who will work again with them to make these sorts of things happen. Because if we think about that train to Auckland, it's not us versus Auckland.
No.
It's not an us versus them, it's us together. And so it's how do we complement? And again, if I use that analogy of that front row of the scrum, it's not the prop versus the hooker versus the other prop. It's how do we link up and together, as three individuals, move as a team.
Yeah.
And that's where I would like to see, well, certainly if I'm privileged enough to be a councillor voted by the citizens of Hamilton, that's the approach that I'd be taking, is how do we link up, how do we build those strong ties with other great working and hard-working councillors at a local level to advance things that benefit us all.
One thing I thought I might bring up, since we're talking about buses, and
sure,
I hope people don't get fed up with us harping on about buses, is I sat the other day having a chat with some people.
Yep.
How it got onto buses, I do not know. It's one of those conversations that merged through about 5 different topics and ended up at buses.
Yeah.
And we were talking about, like, the Mayor's free bus idea.
Yep.
Brilliant idea. Making use of the buses that are running around empty, because a lot of people said, the bus is running around empty during the middle of the day. That makes sense. We wondered why we don't have a differently managed system from the point of view of having half-size buses of some sort on in the slow periods.
Oh, right, yes.
And adjusting that up so that during the rush hour, say when kids get let out,
yes,
you
go to a larger bus.
And maybe even a larger bus and a half bus to take the overflow, because they've got statistics and information on it, so they know, we only need a small bus for this run for the next 4 times we do this run, because there's hardly anyone, and it keeps the size down, and then adjust that as you get more passengers. Because yes, it's a good idea to try and give people a reason to travel outside the peak hours, because that's what they did with the gold card, was give oldies who've got all day, who can go to appointments a little bit later and come home a little bit earlier, so that they make use of that.
Yes.
But I always wondered, and this is what came up in the discussion, is about, is it feasible to change, for instance, like even having eventually working towards electric buses, because they don't, except for the ones that go out to like Raglan and Cambridge and stuff, it's should theoretically be relatively easy to manage a network like that and go, okay, that bus is, power batteries are getting down, we'll replace it with another one, because the passenger doesn't notice which bus is doing the route.
No.
Because all we need is the sign on the front saying Claudelands.
Yeah.
04 Claudelands or whatever.
So my understanding is, and I'm not an expert on this, but my understanding of it is that it does come down to wise investment. And the problem that you may run into is that when you buy a bus, so let's say it's a 40-seater, there's a certain lifespan that you can get out of it. You maximise the value of that asset over quite a long period of time. If it's well maintained and well cared for, you can actually get a lot of lifespan out of that. The challenge that you have with then running a fleet which is a mixed fleet of small vehicles and larger ones is that the savings that you make of going to the smaller vehicle is virtually nothing compared with the large one. The other problem that you would then potentially have is, let's say, for example, that you have got some of those less popular routes or times within a route have become more popular, and all of a sudden you no longer, that smaller vehicle no longer is fit for purpose because you've got 35 people waiting for a bus that can only take 20.
Yeah.
You then are forced to then buy another big 40-seater to accommodate it, and then you've still got an asset that you're not fully utilising. I think it comes down to the challenge, and this is where I know that Auckland has done a lot of work, and we've got lots of other cities around the world who have learned the challenges of a growing domestic population and how public transportation fits in with that. So we've actually got a lot of really good test cases that we can look at to get good facts on how we progress our journey. And it may be that we say we make the commitment around staying with the larger vehicles, the larger buses, the 40-seaters, and we say, well, we'll cut back on the number of routes that we have, or routes that we have, but we'll increase the frequency. And then as we get those really filling in, people in other areas that are saying, well, look, if you had a route now running out to this part of the city or that part of the city, we would use it. Then you can expand it that way, using the current infrastructure.
Because see, Auckland, I've been to Auckland doing a lot of street photography, and I noticed their buses are actually quite well used.
Oh yeah, very much so.
Yeah, because I still haven't figured out their bus system and what bus goes where and all this sort of carry on. But when I've been out and you see these buses go past, they've got heaps of them, and they're almost always, not, I wouldn't say full, but there's a lot of passengers on them most of the time.
So here's one of the things that I've been thinking about, and I know that if I'm thinking about this, it certainly must have been discussed already at a regional council level, is that what if you and I have the tap-on and tap-off system that they have in Auckland. We tap on a bus here in Hamilton, which takes us to a nearest train terminal here in Hamilton.
Okay.
That we then tap off that bus onto that train, which takes us through to, say, the Britomart, the Central Rail Station in Auckland. We tap off that, then tap onto a ferry to take ourselves over to Waiheke or Rangitoto.
Oh, yeah.
And actually, it doesn't matter where we're travelling in that actual area. We might even then jump back on that train and take another train through to Tauranga and come back to Hamilton.
It's so similar to what they do in Hong Kong and even Japan, where they use what they call octopus cards or whatever. So, because we've got a bus card, right? But the bus card, it doesn't work anything other than the buses.
No,
and we need a system that nowadays people use online payment systems and stuff. So having a system where you can chuck money on that card a lot easier.
Well, it could almost be effective. You saying, actually, I'll set a series of instructions where if my bus ticket, whether it might be actually on a phone or a physical card, if it gets below a certain amount of money, I give it authority to go to my bank account and top it up to a certain level. So you no longer have to worry about, do I have enough money on my card? There's always enough there.
Because that's the other thing is, with the Hamilton bus system at the moment, the bus driver still has to punch buttons and give you a ticket.
Yeah.
There are councils around New Zealand that are using the tap and go system. And if we can expand the tap and go, say for instance, to not just exist on one system but go across the lot, like you're saying.
Well, this is kind of where
makes
I'm saying...
it more usable in the end.
Of course, and then if it becomes more usable and more convenient, and it's affordable, and it's reliable, then you sit there and go, well, why do I need to have a personal car? I mean, and I'm not saying for 1 minute that I'm anti-cars, because, I know that people love their cars, and that's fine, but you might not need to have it every single journey. And so those journeys that it's appropriate to use another form of transportation, you do.
I think this is where regional council, working with councils, can come and be very important.
Enable.
Because we've got a horse and cart situation or an egg and chicken situation where you get people who say, but the public transport system is not well used. And you go, yes, but you need a reliable system in place before people would use it. It's like saying, people didn't read books back far enough. But before people could read books needed to be printed and people needed to learn to read, right, before you could read a book. Yeah. So the fact that people weren't reading many books was not because that they weren't reading, it was because that they didn't have the knowledge and they didn't have the facility to.
And this is where a regional council can invest with an intergenerational focus in partnership with others to actually give a better outcome. So if you think about the cluster, and I know I'm most probably going to hammer on about this point, but I do think it's something that's worth considering. If we just think about some cities literally across the ditch from us in Australia, so Sydney and Melbourne, those two cities in their own right, so Sydney by itself and Melbourne by itself, actually have pretty much now close to the entire population of New Zealand living in each of those cities. Yeah. And it's pretty, we all know, I used to be a travel agent, so I know how easy it is that people just feel, I'm just going to charge over the ditch to go to Sydney for the weekend or to Melbourne for a show or something like that. As a country, if we don't learn how to blend appropriately, Auckland, Hamilton, Tauranga, and the surrounding communities that live in those three provinces together, just between those three, we've got maybe 2 million people. We've got a chance of competing with the likes of those singular cities.
Yeah.
If we don't, we stand a very real risk, that our next generation of dynamic, smart, and clever young New Zealanders who could live anywhere and work anywhere around the world might say, yeah, I do love New Zealand. It'll always be my home. I'll always pull on the black top when the All Blacks are playing, or the Silver Ferns are playing, or the Black Caps, or whatever that is. But actually, for a really good job, to be a part of a really dynamic community, and to enjoy a good environment, my home now is, Sydney, or Buenos Aires, or London, or Bucharest, or wherever. So we've actually got to learn that by working smarter together, using the benefits that we've got, we'll have a chance of competing on a global scale, let alone if we want to attract some of the smartest, cleverest minds to come to our country to become new Zealanders, to make...
we may have to put up with I suppose, less economical public transport system for a few years while people adjust to it and realise it's reliable, and then start changing their habits.
Well,
the mayor's idea of encouraging kids to use buses by making it free for them, I quite like that, because what that does is it encourages a young generation of people. It gives them a convenient, cheap way to travel.
Yes.
But it does encourage them to get into the mindset of travelling on public transport. They end up being... You look at people in places like New York, where there are people over there that from the day they're born to the day they retire, they use public transport
all the time,
because they were brought up. There's no concept of buying a car for some of them.
But it's reliable, it's affordable, and it's convenient.
Yeah.
And I think if we sometimes keep it to those very simple tenets and saying, how do we make sure it's reliable, it's convenient, and it's affordable, that then you'll get communities that we might be surprised in saying, oh, I never thought they'd use it. They go, well, why wouldn't I? Because it's bloody obvious. I mean, away we go. But I mean, that's only one aspect of the role that, the regional council has. So let me give you another one, which is pest control.
Right.
So we're talking about pests. So you've got possums that chew through large amounts of really pristine New Zealand bush. And actually, if I think about Councillor Paula Southgate, who's running for the mayoralty as well, we just had a chat to now, the work that she did around the Halo project, in helping create those important trees which soak up carbon, but also are a wonderful haven for birds to come and rest in. That improves our environment, that improves our economy. The regional council's got a responsibility around helping control and manage those pests. Yeah. But it's not just the pests that are on the land. So there is a rather nasty pest from a marine point of view called the Mediterranean fan worm. Now, and what that does is that comes in on the hulls of ships that can come from other places around the world to New Zealand. Now, of course, as an island nation, for us to receive goods and export goods by bulk, efficiently, it comes by ship. I mean, and
airplanes to some degree, but mostly by ship.
Mostly by ship. So, having a regional council that's focused on protecting that marine environment, that's really important as well, because if the Mediterranean fan worm gets stuck into our local marine environment, that could have a huge impact on things like our aquaculture. So the big beds of those wonderful green-lipped mussels that Kiwis love eating on the barbecue in the summertime, which we export.
Which will also have an impact on the stuff people freely gather from the coastline themselves.
And the importance that, and this is one of the things that I think that, iwi brings really, really strongly to the table, is this guardianship of our natural environment. And I think we could learn a lot more from iwi about how, as a joint, as a partnership between tangata whenua and European New Zealanders and those that are coming alongside, how we can work together to protect our natural environment. The regional council has got responsibilities about protecting that. So there's lots of really critical things they do. Civil defence. Civil defence is the responsibility of the regional council.
I never thought about that.
Yeah. They have. I talked a little bit earlier about the size of the organisation. So one of the things that people may or may not realise is that currently there's about I think it's about 300 kilometres worth of stop banks, primarily out towards the Thames Coromandel Peninsula, protecting. So these are flood banks, stop banks protecting inland land from inundation of water. The land that it's protecting is about 3,000 square kilometres of dirt. Now, to put that into some perspective, it's about 740,000 football pitches side on, which is a lot of football. It's a lot of ground. That's a big chunk of ground. That ground, every year, generates for New Zealand Inc. around $2.2 billion worth of economic activity. So you imagine if those stop banks burst and break because they're not maintained properly, what would happen if New Zealand Inc. all of a sudden loses $2.2 billion worth of money coming into the economy every year? What sort of impact is that going to have on your life here in Hamilton and for the people around you? It's significant. And the regional council is responsible for sitting down and working out how to fund that infrastructure protection and what are others methodologies. So we know that the climate is changing. We know that we are seeing more significant climatic events that we have to deal with.
So that potentially means rising sea levels, which therefore means potentially more flooding in lower lying areas.
Absolutely.
We get it here with Hamilton with the Waikato River. There's a couple of pieces down sort of in the general area of St Andrews Golf Course where the river, where the land is actually quite low, and there's a couple of parks there that flood in the worst parts of it, and that sort of thing.
So you can see, and as I say, it's not just about an environmental outcome; it's a community and there's an economy, and that's why the regional council's got some big responsibilities to do some big important pieces of work. That's what interests me about it. It's I use the analogy. It's like a three-legged stool that your grandparents might have had in their old home, and each of those legs is a different aspect. So one's a community, one's an economy, one's an environment. But between each of those three legs, there are two struts that go out to the other two legs. So they support and are supported by each other leg. So without all three doing their job jointly and together as a unit, the thing falls over and you've got nothing to sit on. But if you can get that seat well supported and in balance, you can pretty much do anything you want on top of that stool. It's pretty exciting.
And I think that's why it's important for people to understand basically the importance of thinking about who we have making up, well, in the case of Hamilton, our part of the regional council.
The people that are listening to this, they will, if they live in Hamilton, they will get to choose 4 of the 14.
And they need to be people who, like yourself, think about these things. Don't just take it as something to do, but actually seriously think about the responsibilities involved and some of the ideas and how we're going to approach different situations and all this sort of thing.
Look, I mean, ultimately, I would like to think that voters sit there and care about the people that are around them. So if you care about the people that are around you, you make a decision on people who will make the best chance of giving outcomes that will look after everyone. But that's the joy of it.
The joy of the job. And the interesting thing is, it's up to the people just to decide whether you're in or not. And I must admit, it's sort of like the weirdest sort of job interview you can have, isn't it?
I've done a lot of. I haven't had a large number of jobs, but I've been involved in a lot of interviewing for a lot of people for a lot of gigs. But this is by far the most unusual job that I've ever had to really fight for. And that's what I actually like that. I like the fact that people say to me, "How's it going?" I'm saying it's bloody hard.
It's like turning up to a job interview with a panel of 160, 170 people, and you're going, okay.
And the first one is actually saying to them, "Hey, you know what? I'm here. But look, that's the job, and I don't mind it at all.
Oh, thanks for your time.
My absolute
and
pleasure,
good
Lance.
luck in the election.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity.
And I'm going
to
to see if I can dig up a few more regional councillors. I've only found one other one at the moment. But you guys are a little bit hard to find, the candidates that are standing for this are hard to find.
I can promise you that if I'm fortunate enough to be elected, I won't be hard to find. People will find that they can get hold of me, and I'm more than happy to come to them and talk to them about their region.
That's good. So I think that's an important thing for people to feel confident in the fact that they can communicate with the people that represent them.
Yeah.
And that way they're more inclined to see that their vote counts, because when they vote someone in, they can interact with them. It's not just a once every 3 years you hear from them.
Look, I suppose if you thought of a couple of aspects of how to sum me up, I'm energetic and accessible.
Yeah.
And that's important because, as I say, ultimately I'm there to serve the citizens, not just of the city, but of the entire region.
Yeah, cool.
Cheers, Lance. Thanks,
cool.
mate.
Thanks.
Okay.
Bye.